It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening and to be invited to share my experience of leadership with you. So let me tell you a little bit about sort of Cambridge and where I come from. It's a university which I think is reasonably well known in the world. We are 800 years old, over 800 years old, and we have survived through multiple upheavals, world wars, civil wars, you name it, it's happened in Cambridge. And we've come through all of that. And the reason for that, I think, is the approach that it takes to things, the innovative approach all the time, sort of changing the world, looking for new ideas, new approaches to things, breaking the conventional thinking that goes ahead. And that's led to things which really have impacted and changed your world. So what's come out of Cambridge? Well, the jet engine, the first jet engine was developed there. We still have a big activity on turbines and jet engines. The ability in the pandemic, everyone's sort of familiar with the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, the Indian variant, the UK variant of the virus. That all comes about from the ability to read the genome of the virus, and also the ability to read the genome of our cells, which is a big industry these days. The technology that does that came out of Cambridge. In vitro fertilization, the ability to have children in fertile couples was first done at Cambridge. The technology inside all your mobile phones is designed in Cambridge. Might surprise you to know the rules of football were first developed in Cambridge. Why did that happen? Because we had students from all over the country come to Cambridge in the 1800s. And in those days, every locality had its own rules for how to play football or soccer. And so when they tried to play it in Cambridge as a group there, all that happened was lots of arguments, lots of disputes, because everyone was playing to different rules. So they sat down and they said, well, let's solve this. Let's set up a common set of Cambridge rules for playing soccer that we'll all agree to. And when the Football Association was started, later on in the 1800s, they looked around for, we need some rules for this game. They looked around and said, actually, the Cambridge rules look pretty good. Let's start with those. And they added a few things onto them, like offside, etc. But that's the basis of the rules that came through today. If you're familiar with Alexa, most of the voice systems, Alexa, Cortana, have a big Siri team in Cambridge as well. Those all are based on Cambridge technology, and 6 of the top 10 pharmaceutical drugs in the world have come out of Cambridge technology. So there's a lot of innovation has gone over there over a long time, over 800 years. And we're quite international. So we have about 50 Nigerian students, about 11 of them undergraduate, and about 40 postgraduate students on our campus. And that adds, we have a very diverse campus, people from about 130 countries around the world. So it is a good melting pot as well, and I'll come on to that a bit later. But let's start off. What's the purpose of today? And I'd like to sort of get a few of you to start chipping in, because this is about innovation. So what is innovation? What is innovation for you? In fact, there is no one definition of innovation. There are a lot of different innovations people use in different ways and different times. So what I'm going to do is share with you my view of innovation. And that is, innovation is the practical application of new thinking. And there are variations on this. Some people say I say it's new thinking. Some people say new ideas, but I think new thinking is a much broader concept than just an idea. It applies much more widely, and it applies to everything we do. But the important thing is it's a practical application. So we can do things which are novel. You could take the engine in a car, you can put it in the front, as most people do. You can put it in the back, as Volkswagen do, which has certain advantages, they believe. You could put it on the roof. Would putting it on the roof, I mean, it's novel. Is it practical? And I think innovation, it's one of the tests of innovation. Is it something practical? It's not just an idea. It's just not something novel. It's a practical application of of new thinking that you have. So, why do we need innovation? The world is changing. We're all focused on the pandemic at the moment and the change. Look at what we're doing now. That's the result of innovation. We could not have had this meeting without somebody coming up with a Zoom system that allows you in Nigeria, Alim and his team in London. I'm actually, you wouldn't know it if I didn't tell you, I'm in Barbados at the moment. So that here we are across the world holding a meeting like this, thanks to innovation. And I think there is an important element behind it, which is the world is changing around us. If you don't do the innovation, someone else will do it for you. And what does that mean? If someone else does it for you, it means they start to cannibalize your business, your products, your services that you're offering. So it's always better that you are at the forefront with the innovation, introducing the new ideas, even if it means that it's destroying your current business. Because if you don't, someone else will come along and do it. And I've said Cambridge has been around for 800 years. It used to be about 70 years ago, the average lifetime of a company on the US S&P 500 index was about 50 years. These days it's 10 years. The rate of change is increasing rapidly, and if we don't keep up with it, people will go past us. And this is not anything new. So my first quote, which I think is the only constant is change. And that was said by somebody called Heraclitus, and you'll look at the dates there. That is 2,500 years ago that he said the only constant is change. And that's been true throughout all times. And it's been changes which we are in control of within our organizations, but a lot of it is change which is imposed on us by the outside world. We have no choice on it. And say if we don't change, other people will do it for us. Look at what Elon Musk has done for the automotive industry. We all talked about electric cars, but he came along and suddenly the whole of the automotive industry, an industry which has been there for a long, long time, suddenly finds itself having to rapidly adapt to new innovative thinking, because if they don't, other people will go past them and they will become obsolete. And we have seen a number of companies in that area go out of business. So we have to innovate constantly, because that's what the world demands of us. And if it doesn't, Cambridge, Darwin, survival of the fittest, the people that can change to the environment around them, the organisms that can change are the ones that actually survive. But what does it take to change? What do you need to be as people? And there, I really like, there's an Irish playwright and political activist from the last century called George Bernard Shaw. He's a quite well-known playwright internationally. And he said two things, which I think are saying the same thing. He said, some men see things as they are and ask why. Why is it like that? What's happening here? Why? But others dream of things that never were and ask why not. Nobody thought they needed a mobile phone with a smartphone. I mean, none of us thought that we didn't need a camera, that it would be in our phone, that we wouldn't need maps because it'd be on our phone. We wouldn't need to write letters because it would be on our phone. But Steve Jobs did. He had that dream of something different. He asked, why can't we have a phone that does that? And the result of that is the phone companies that were around prior to him, people like Nokia and others, Motorola, he just basically cannibalized their business for them. And that is one individual. Remember, Nokia had a whole team of people thinking about where's the future of mobile phones going? And they didn't spot the smartphone. There were smartphones around before the iPhone. There was the Palm Trio and a few others, but Steve Jobs was the one that sort of saw that innovative opportunity and made something of it. And the other phone companies are the one that died and suffered as a result of it. So we need to think about sort of where's the world going. And the other thing George Bernard Shaw says, that we all try to be reasonable people. Reasonable people adapt ourselves to the world that we're in. And so the world shapes us. It's the unreasonable one who try and shape the world to them. And Steve Jobs, again, was a good example of that. Someone who tried to say the world should be different. And he was unreasonable enough to say, no, I'm not going to fit in. I'm going to do something very different, and it's going to work, and it's going to work well, and it's going to change people's lives. So there's this element of being the person that stands out. I spent part of my career working in Japan, and they have a saying there that the nail that stands out gets hammered down. It is all very much about sort of consensual thinking rather than individual thinking. And it is that, this is the very opposite of that. The nail that stands up should be spotted, should be supported, should be celebrated, because the nails that stand up are the things that make us trip up and pay attention. So part of this, as you go through it, will be being the unreasonable man, or unreasonable woman, I should say. But that's not easy. Putting yourself against the world is not easy. And you will get a lot of pushback against it and difficulty. And again, this is nothing new. Machiavelli, a famous Italian diplomat, philosopher, and politician, he wrote a book called The Prince, and it is really worth reading. People have quite a lot of negative associations of the name Machiavelli. It's about someone who's underhand, someone who's scheming, someone who's untrustworthy. But he actually thought very deeply about, he lived in an age of great political turmoil, upset around the time of the Medici's family in Italy, when there was a lot of challenge in life. And he thought very deeply about that and wrote some really good things about how you survive in these environments. And he said, there's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. And why is that? It's because the innovator has enemies in all those who profit from the old order. And this lukewarmness arises partly from the fear of their adversaries and partly from the incredulity of mankind, who do not truly believe in anything new until they have actually experienced it. And think back yourselves, put yourself back in positions where people have put new ideas to you, and what do you think about them? Are you open to them? Do you say, that's great, let's give it a try? Or do you say, actually, sort of, there's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Is that the approach? We don't need that change. It's not important. I came across that back in my career, back in the 1980s. One of the things we spotted was that the emergence of digital imaging chips and memory chips. And one of the first cameras that came out, which was the digital camera, came out of Canon, had a digital image chip, and it had a little 1-inch floppy disk, which you put in there that it recorded the pictures on. And they were so-so quality and all the rest. And we went to Polaroid and said, you need to be thinking about the digital imaging space. If you remember, Polaroid was the one that did chemical processing of instant photos. You pressed the button, the film slid out the front, you rubbed it between your hands, and over the next minute or two, the image appeared. And we said, you ought to be thinking about this. And the answer was, no, we don't need that. We've got plenty of better cameras coming out and better films and all the rest of it. We don't need digital imaging. Where is Polaroid today? Well, there's a few Polaroid cameras have come back into the market. It's become a sort of, if you like, a bit of a historical thing that people like. But Polaroid died because they didn't follow that trend. Kodak did the same. Kodak came late into digital cameras, and the whole business, the massive business, died because it was based around film and processing and developing film, not digital and the instant gratification we get now, taking a photo on our phone and seeing it on the screen instantly. I used to go around with my 35mm camera and I'd take photos. I wouldn't know what they were until I put them through the developer maybe a week or a month later, and got them back and found out which were good photos and which were bad ones and where the camera had shaken. Now we see it instantly, we take it again. That was innovation, and it was a danger that Kodak and Polaroid were chemicals companies, and they were wiped out of existence by electronics companies who came along with a new approach to doing that. So it is important that you do this. And there's a big problem in this. A lot of what innovation is done, I call, we're going to candle makers with a light bulb. And we're saying, look, I've got this great idea. It's called a light bulb. It's got electricity, and you switch it on and it gives you light. You don't need to light your candle, and it lasts forever. The wax doesn't burn down. And the candle maker doesn't understand it. What's all these wires, this vacuum, this glass? We don't understand that skill. Anyway, we've got much better wax and string in development. We don't need to change. And what happens is the light bulb takes out the candle makers. So it is very difficult in those early days. But there is something called the penetration curve. It's not about trying to change everyone, the whole world at once. How did mobile phones came in? Actually, Apple launched the smartphone, the first iPhone. It wasn't very good, but a few people had to have it. And based on that, they talked about their experience using a smartphone versus a conventional mobile phone. They talked to their colleagues, and some of us picked it up. And there is this concept in all of marketing. It doesn't come with a big bang generally. It starts with a small proportion of the population called the innovators. They're about 2.5% of any population. They're the people who must have the latest gadget, whatever it is. You see them all the time. If they have a good experience, they will talk about their experience. They'll be enthusiastic about it. They'll talk to you. And then we have the next wave come in of called the early adopters, which are about 25% of the population. I was an early adopter on the iPhone. I got my first one because other people, I was skeptical of it. I wasn't very impressed by the performance of the phone, but it got better, and people talked to me about their experience with it, and I thought, well, I got to give this a try. And at the other end, there are people called laggards. There are people who don't have a television, they don't have a phone, they don't have lots of things that we take for granted. Some people will never get there, but it is this idea. And a colleague of mine many years ago looked at so many new innovations, and you can almost draw them one on top of another of the timeline of their adoption coming in, starting with the innovators who picked them up. So part of this is not try and convert the whole world at once to your innovation. Try and find the people who are the enthusiasts, who are intrigued by what you're doing. Get them to have a good experience, and then to roll it out. Do a lot of what I call pilots. Pilots are great. I almost never in Cambridge roll out a new program without first going out to people and saying, hey, we've got this new idea. We want to try it out. Will you be part of a pilot for us? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't work, we learn things from it not working, and either we abandon it or we improve it and we come back around and round again. It's very different from going out and saying, hey, we've got this new product, and everyone says, hang on a minute, that doesn't work for us. So the way you introduce, recognize what Niccolo Machiavelli said about the perils of introducing things. But what's the consequence of this? And I think you're a good example of this. The change is made by unreasonable people who are prepared to do this. Innovation and getting it adopted is not easy. You need good, enthusiastic people who are committed to sort of trying to see it through. It needs good people to do this. If the counter side of that is if it was easy, everybody could do it, and we wouldn't need you. We wouldn't need good people like you to do it. Everyone would be doing it, and it would be a very different place we're in. It does require good people, and the bigger the innovation, the bigger the person needs to be. It's hard work, it's not easy, and that's where you need to really put your effort in. Now, so if you're going to do this, next quote. So John Harvey-Jones was a famous UK industrialist who became a TV star. He became a TV star because when he retired as chairman of a company called ICI, he then went on to become what was called a troubleshooter. And every week on television was an hour-long program where he went into a company and looked at what was happening there, a company with problems, and he acted as a coach and mentor to the company to try and get them through their problem. And one of his quotes, which I really like, which I think covers all of this, is if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. Because when we're doing the innovation, we have to have a clear goal in mind. And I think there are three different tiers we need to look at. Everyone talks about having a strategy and having a plan or a strategy and implementing it. But I think there's something more important than that, and that's having a vision of where you want to go. And a vision should be something which changes slowly. Vision is where you're going. I'm getting in a boat and I'm going to sail solo from Nigeria to New York. In the mid-Atlantic, there's a big storm, the boat gets spun around. If I just carry on sailing in the direction it happens to be pointing, who knows where I end up? It's knowing I want to go to New York that says after the storm, I turn things around, I take stock, and I re-point myself towards where I want to go. And my example of this is Everest. If you want the tallest mountain in the world, your vision is, I want to be on the top of Everest. You know exactly where you need to be. It's the highest point on Earth. There are actually 19 different ways of getting up there, 19 different strategies for getting up there. You can go the hard way up the north face, you can go the standard route up the South Col, and join the queues these days to get onto the summit. There's lots of different ways of getting up there, lots of different strategies for how you get to the top. And they all work depending on your skills, your abilities, your interests. And then there's tactics, which are, how do we get up there? Do we do it with oxygen? Do we do it without oxygen? Do we do it by putting ladders and bolts all the way up and climbing up them? Or do we do it freestyle? There's lots of different tactics you can use to tackle different parts of it, but they all come to the same thing. You're always trying to get to the top there, whichever strategy you're using, whichever tactics you're using, they're all pointed towards one place where you want to go. And you may decide that actually I'm going to go up the north face, and you get partway up it and you decide this is way beyond my capability. So I'll come down and I'll redo my strategy to go up another easier route. But you've still got the same vision at the end of it of where you want to go to. And I think that's important. That's important that people start at the vision at the top, then do the strategy. And I was always taught that there are three independent variables in an organization which define it. One is the vision of what you want to go. Two is the leadership. And three is the culture of the organization. And everything else is a drop-down result of getting those three right. And as leaders in your organizations, you should be responsible for the vision of where you want to go. Do we want to, as a bank, what do we want to do? Where do we see ourselves in 5 years' time? An exercise I call postcards from the future. Sit down, imagine you're 5 years or 10 years in the future, and you're sending a postcard back to yourself today, describing how you are as an organization, what your products are, all the rest of it, in 10 years' time. That gives you the vision of where you want to go. There's a famous Chinese general who said that no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, and you need to be alert to things changing. On a mountain, things are changing all the time. Snow falls, ice forms, rain, wind, storms, clouds, all these things. You need to adapt along the way to the way things are changing underneath you, but always keep in mind where you want to go. And vision should only change very slowly. Strategy may change much more rapidly on a sort of 1 year, even 6 month basis as you learn new things in innovation. And the tactics, you more or less can do those as you go along. But one of the things is you're a leader in this. And there's this nice quote from Nelson Mandela, and didn't he change the world? Wasn't he a fantastic individual? I think someone that everyone looks up to for what he achieved, given what he went through. One of the things he said, one of the things I learned when I was negotiating was that until I changed myself, I could not change others. And that is true here in innovation. If you want to be an innovator, if you want to lead change in your organization, you need to do what's called walking the talk. It's no good just saying, this is what we're going to do. You've got to be seen to lead it, to do it. You want to be leading from the front and setting the example for everyone that does that. And that may need change in yourself, because some of these areas are not comfortable to go into. They can be very personally uncomfortable, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. But you need to make that change, and you need to make that leap of faith. Because if you won't make it, how can you expect anyone else following you to want to make it? It's important in doing that, though, that you change in a way which is true to yourself. I've seen all sorts of people. I had a good example. We had a very big figure in both physical and other senses of the word, press baron called Robert Maxwell. He was famous because he robbed his pension fund and then was found floating dead off his boat in the Mediterranean Sea when it was discovered, and it's the whole scandal around that. But he was a very big, very forceful figure. I went to a meeting with him about innovation in his company. I was accompanying a colleague. It was my colleague's meeting. I was just there, sat there. And my colleague was a particular type of person. He walked into that meeting and big, intimidating Robert Maxwell opposite him said, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? He said, well, I've been looking at your R&D department. They're a load of crap, aren't they? Why do you put up with them? And Robert Maxwell just let out a big laugh and he said, you're right. What are we going to do about it? That was because my colleague Nigel had a style, a personality, everything that allowed him to do that. I knew if I had tried to make that comment to Robert Maxwell, I would probably have left the room without my feet touching the ground. Because I don't have his style, I don't have his charisma, etc., that he had to be able to say that. The facial expressions that go with it, that sort of say, I'm sort of a bit kidding here, this is a bit of a joke, stimulate thing. It works for him, it wouldn't work for me. So I think you have to try and be true to yourself. To be otherwise, you need to be a very good actor, and being a very good actor in role for a long time is very difficult. And when the going gets tough, it tends to fall apart and you go back to who you are. So you need to change yourself, but build it around who you are as an individual, not who I am, not who anyone else is. You can look at other people and say, what can I learn from that? And what does that tell me about how I should do it? But don't try and copy. And then the very last one is, of my quotes, is Steve Jobs, an American entrepreneur, and I think we all know him and what he's done for us. Now, I think the important thing about Steve Jobs is he actually illustrates the difference between leadership and management. Leadership is about what we want to do, what we're trying to achieve. Management is about how you do that. Steve Jobs was a fantastic, inspirational leader. I don't think anyone has any doubt about that. You saw him on the platform selling his products, introducing people to new ideas which they hadn't thought of before, changing the world as he did it, not just in computers, but in movies, in a whole range of other areas. He was actually a pretty bad manager. If you read any of his autobiographies, any of the comments about him, he was divisive. He was extremely difficult to work with. He caused conflict just because he liked causing conflict with people, personal conflicts. He demeaned people. He was a very bad manager, but he was a fantastic, inspirational, innovative leader. So you don't need to do both. I'm not very good at the management side. I have good people that do that for me. I concentrate on doing what I do well, which is the innovation part of it. And again, you need to think about that, sort of how you make sure that both the inspiration the innovation leadership is there, which is yourselves, but also the management that is there to deliver the jobs. Because if Steve Jobs hadn't had Johnny Ives and others around him that did it, he would never have put it together himself. Steve Wozniak actually built his first computer. Steve Jobs didn't. It was the other people that made it happen for him. A lot of people are not innovative in the workplace because the workplace doesn't encourage them to be innovative, so you don't see it in them. And so part of this is encouraging a workplace where we have a environment where in Cambridge Enterprise where individuals are encouraged to try things new, to actually be innovative. They're given a lot of freedom to do things their own way. And they're also told that a lot of the things you try will probably fail, but you'll learn a lot from those. So we have a no blame culture. So if people try things innovative and fail, we sit down and say, so what can we learn from that? What can we take from that which we can adopt and use in other areas or to make this work better? And so that is an environment which not everyone will be an innovator. I'll come back to that sort of a little later on. But the people who are innovative, you want to give them the freedom to come forward. Time for you to do a bit of action. I hope you were all asked to bring one of these. Everyone got their plastic bag, just a simple bag out of a supermarket. And why have I asked you to bring one? Well, in a normal event of this nature, we might get you in a breakout room to sit down and there'd be a plastic bag on the table and you could talk about it and play with it and do all sorts of things. We can't do that in this environment. There can't be a shared one. So you each need one that you can play with. So what are we going to do? We're going to go into our breakout rooms. And what you're going to do is come up with as many innovative uses as you can think of for this plastic bag. It should be quick fire ideas. Don't be judgmental. Try anything, outrageous ideas, sensible ideas, just get ideas out. You should be able to come up with, in the 5 to 10 minutes we'll give you, with about 20 to 30 ideas. And then we'll come back, we'll ask the first team to report back on their ideas, and then we'll go around the other teams in sequence to add the ideas which you're not seeing on the board. And then after you've done that, I'll tell you some of the ideas that have come out of this in the past and some of the innovative approaches to this. So now is the time, go into your breakout rooms, elect the person that's going to come back and feed back to us at the end of it, and go and be creative about a very common item which we all use every day. How can we use this in different ways than just take the supermarket shopping home? You can think of many different uses for it, and a number of those we all do it at some time. Let me show you some of the things which have come out, and I think these are sort of things which a number of these you've covered. So you got it as people came up with hats. I think Group 1 said about something for growing plants in, and I think both groups had it for something to put your shoes in to keep them dry, but make sure it's a plastic bag which doesn't have holes in the bottom, which some of them do, because that's not going to work too well. So these are all different uses, using it as a bag, as sort of a container into which you can put things made of plastic. And Group 2 mentioned a rope. You can use it in different ways. These are ways which creative ways in which people have used plastic bags, not as a container to put things in. You take it like that and you twist it up, and you can use it as a wrapping, as a skipping rope, as a material to make a chair seat in from a frame and things like that. And Group 2 you came up with that use of it, which is very different from how we normally use it. So that's more innovative. And then Group 1, you actually came up with one which a lot of people miss, which is using it as a material. So all of these things are made by basically taking plastic bags and melting them or using them as fillers. So in India, and this is spreading around the world now, they found that if they put the plastic bags, shredded them and put them in the tarmac to put on the roads, actually the road was much more durable and it was also quieter. And that's an innovation that came out of India that started to spread around the world. Similarly, you can do the same thing to make construction blocks out of it and make buildings out of your plastic bag. And in the UK, we have garden furniture, Traditionally, it's been wood, but wood sort of, it rots if you don't look after it. You have to continually paint it with preservatives and protective paints. You can make very nice looking benches for the garden out of basically taking your plastic and melting it and reforming it with plastic bag. And then you get a very durable plastic bench, which will last for a long, long time. And I've got those in my garden because they don't need any maintenance. So that's completely different. We've just taken the material out of it. One of the ones that I love, though, and I hope you don't think this is inappropriate, because we did this once, exercise with a group of children, and their solution involved elephants. Can anyone think of how you might use a plastic bag with an elephant? Let me take you out of your misery. The children suggested it would make a good condom for an elephant. And that's sort of, I think it really illustrates children do not have these things baked into them of sort of a plastic bag, this is what we use it for. They've got much freer thinking minds. They haven't been constrained by conventional thinking, and they come up with something. That's the only group I've ever come across which thought a plastic bag could be used as a condom. So with that, hope you found that sort of an illuminating exercise. So I'm going to talk about being lucky. Who doesn't want to be lucky in innovation? Who doesn't feel that there's an element of luck in those that succeed and those that don't? So click your hand up if you think there's luck in being successful in innovation. So what we're going to cover is one of the books which has been quite influential in my life is this one, which is called The Luck Factor. And it's some research by Dr. now Professor Richard Wiseman, who looked at what is it that why are some people unlucky? Why do they think they're unlucky? Why is their experience one of always being unlucky? And some people, everything just seems to work for them. They turn out to be very lucky. And he did this as an academic research exercise, taking groups of people and doing all sorts of experiments and exercises with them. And he came down to 4 simple principles that will change your luck and your life. Now, you can go out and buy the book. It's on Amazon or your local bookstore, however you want, and it's a good read. But I'm going to give you just the 4 basic principles. He has a lot of sub-principles coming under it, each one. But the important thing is that being lucky is a teachable and a learnable skill. So let's go through some of those 4 principles. The first one is lucky people look out for new experiences and connections and keep an open mind to them. So a lot of us go into situations with a fixed view in our mind. We go in thinking we're going to like something, we're not going to like it, all the rest of it. One of the ones I deal with, and it comes to this question sort of about team. In normal times, we run a lot of events at Cambridge Enterprise. I go into an event, and what do I see? I see a group of my people all together in a little clump talking to each other. And I see lots of other people all in little clumps talking to the people they know. That's not lucky. Unlucky people will go into a room and say, there's somebody I know, I'll go and talk to them. A lucky person will go into a room and say, today I'm going to talk to anyone who's wearing orange. And as a result of that, they talk to a lot of people they wouldn't normally talk to. And there are techniques you can learn about how to do good networking. You go and talk to someone, you pretty quickly pick up, is this something interesting I want to stay with? Do I want to move them on and talk to get another new experience? And there are good networking skills which can be learned of how to do that effectively. But the idea is you try and get as many new experiences as you can and learn new things. Now, a great exponent of this is a British businessman called Sir Tim Schmidt. And he is famous in the UK and increasingly around the world for what's called the Eden Project, which you can see behind him, which is basically some biodomes which have closed environmental systems within them, and school children, public, all sorts go there. They're a fantastic place to work and to visit. Now, there's two things about Tim Schmidt. When he gives a talk to an audience, he doesn't have any preparation. He doesn't have any notes. Because that, in his mind, that says, I already know what I want out of this, and I'm going to give it. He goes into a meeting with just an open agenda, and he starts talking, and then he looks at the reaction to people and the feedback he gets, and what he does shapes as he goes. And each time his talk is a different talk, because the people he's talking to, the way it develops is very different. And I think that's him keeping an open mind. But he does much more than that, because being who he is and having the success he has, he gets a lot of requests for him to go and give talks, meet and visit people. And when I met him about 10 years ago, he had a very simple rule for his office on that. He didn't say sort of go through and work out which are the ones which look the most interesting to go to. He said, accept every third one that comes in. And by doing that, he got new experiences, and he tells a really good story about that. So his office came to him and said, you've had this invitation to go and give a talk at a village hall, which is about 2 hours drive away. Do you really want to do it? And he said, was it the third one that came along? And they said, yes. He said, okay, accept it. Then he went along to the village hall, and he went along and he gave one of his sort of open talks, the village hall, and they all liked it and appreciated it. And he came away from that and went back, expecting nothing more of it. About 2 years later, he went to get the Eden project funded, and he went to a group of 3 different local authorities who were allocating money to various projects in their areas. And the nature of the meeting was every single thing that went through there was a competition as to what was it going to do for my local authority. I don't care about the other 2 of you. I want to know what it's going to do for me. And if it's not doing anything for me, I'm not voting for it. And so a lot of projects went through like this. Tim went in there and gave his one, and he said, I want to set up in one of your areas my Eden project. This is my idea. And before the discussion even started, someone spoke up, and he said, I'm from Gloucestershire, and this project isn't going to be in Gloucestershire, he said. But 2 years ago, Tim came to our village hall and he talked to us. And I thought it was really fantastic what he's doing, and I think we should support it. And as a result of that, one person saying, this isn't doing anything for me in my area, but I think this is great. Based on Tim's sort of chance, meetings, connections, making as many new connections as you can, that led to the other 2 saying, well, obviously the one where it was going said, great, we want it. And the other one said, okay, we're behind it as well. And he got his backing. That's how the whole thing started. Not from any structured approach, but just by creating new experiences, new connections randomly, rather than trying to always look for the opportunity, and keeping an open mind when you do it. I think that is very important. It's too easy for us to take these new ideas and sort of dismiss them. People said, how do you create a culture in your company? Well, one of the ways you do that is actually by encouraging people, by not dismissing their ideas, getting them to work them up, work them through, come back with them. And I think if you can present that type of approach to your organization, and if you can encourage them, as I say, when I see my team clustered together in a room talking either to themselves or people they already know, the first thing I do is go straight for that group and say, come on guys, break up, go and talk to some people you don't know, that you haven't spoken to before, go and find out some new things happening. And I have to keep on reinforcing them. It's not a natural thing. We like to talk to people we know. It's a little bit intimidating to go and start a conversation with someone complete stranger. But for me, a lot of my best innovations have come out of those new experiences. And keep an open mind. I was trying to solve something once, and someone sent me a paper and said, isn't this doing what you're trying to do? And I looked at it, and it sort of no, I don't think it does. But then I didn't just say sort of, okay, dismiss it. I actually sat down and I was on a car journey with a friend. They were driving. I was in the passenger seat. It was about 3 hours on a very boring road. And I sat there thinking, that doesn't work. But why doesn't it work? And the question sort of, why? And out of that thinking, I worked out why it doesn't work. And in the moment I worked out why it didn't work, I also understood how to make it work. And I built my second company, all based around that one thing of keeping an open mind to an idea that showing it couldn't work. It was not a barrier. I kept on going at it. So the second thing is lucky people use their intuition and gut feeling a lot more. There's a very good book, I don't know whether you've come across it, written by someone called Malcolm Gladwell, called Blink. And the whole purpose of Blink as a book is to show how our immediate reactions are usually right, but we don't trust our intuition. We don't trust the feeling we have about this. And so as a result of that, we go into a lot of analysis. And what the Blink book shows is that in a lot of situations, your initial reaction is the right answer. I had Ollie Ricola on the right there, was my mentor. I learned so much from Ollie. He was a Finnish businessman. He ran $1 billion company, and he always had time for me. And when you're leading an organization, it's really good to have someone as a mentor like that, because especially when you're at the top, it's lonely. You can't share a lot of your fears and anxieties with your team. It's good to have someone outside that has experience. I was agonizing over a decision I needed to make, and I phoned Ollie up, and he was in Finland, and he liked me phoning up because his wife didn't like him smoking cigars in their apartment, so he'd step outside into the snow and he could smoke his cigar outside while we talked. And I went through my problem with him, and he said, just make a decision, get on with it. He said, you know what to do, just do it. And I said, but what if it's the wrong decision? And he said, and this is the boss of $1 billion company, he said to me, look, decisions are coming at me all the time in my business. I don't have time to analyze each one. I have to go on what I think is my instinct. And if I get half of them right, I'm doing well. He said, and half of them will be wrong. But he said, if I don't make a decision, in 2 weeks' time, I'll still be agonizing over what the right decision is. If I make a decision now based on my instinct, in 2 weeks' time, I'll know whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision. And if it was wrong, I can take what I've learned, I can change the decision or redirect it. He said, so just get on and make the decision. And that was a real moment for me to think, hey, someone running a big business like this, and I've learned this is true of a lot of people in leadership positions, they trust their intuition. They make their decisions. They keep an open mind as to whether the decision is right or wrong, but they learn a lot from it, and then they can adjust as they go. And I think this is really important. Back to climbing Everest, if you come across an impenetrable ice fall, you change your mind and change your decision as to which way you're going up and find another way around it. And Ollie sort of has been a fantastic mentor to me. And if you can get someone like Ollie, it's really, really good. But so be prepared to make the decisions. We had in the UK 2 prime ministers, one followed the other. One was called Tony Blair, quite famous around the world, I think. And then his successor was a guy called Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown wanted that top job so much. Tony Blair sort of was pretty successful in a lot of what he did. He changed the whole country around. Gordon Brown was an absolute disaster. Why was that? Because when you're prime minister, you're needing to make decisions like this. They're coming at you a decision a minute. You don't have time to analyze them. You need to give someone an answer and send them on and get on to the next decision that needs to be made. And Tony Blair could do that. He trusted his instinct and he made the decisions and he corrected them if they were the wrong decisions. Gordon Brown needed to analyze each one. He'd sit down, he'd try and work out what he should be doing. He could handle 1 or 2 decisions a day, and that's not a rate at which a prime minister of a country can handle decisions. So they're all big backlog of decisions needing to be made that piled up behind him. He just couldn't trust himself. He needed to analyze. So there is an element here of lucky people use their intuition and gut feeling and trust it a lot more and accept that it's not 100% accurate. And I think that's a good skill to learn. And it's a good one to induce in your team. And we'll come back to that in the third session of a well-established tool for doing that. The next thing is lucky people expect things to work out. Does anyone recognize the name Jim Lovell? Jim Lovell is the person that said, Houston, we have a problem. He was the captain of Apollo 13, the one which partway to the moon had a major explosion, and he nursed it home. It would be very easy in those circumstances for him to have said, this is a disaster. There's no way out of this. They had so many challenges and problems they had to solve to get him and his crew back successfully to Earth as they did. And if anyone's watched the film Apollo 13, it really gives you a sense of what that is and the amount of creativity that was required to stay alive and to get home. But Jim is one of those lucky people. He expected things to work out from the very beginning. His belief was they were going to get out, they were going to get home. He was not going to be beaten, they were going to get home. And as a result of that, they got home. Now, someone asked earlier about sort of what percentage of people. Now, Jim Lovell has another quote, which I haven't got here, which is, there are 3 types of people. There are those that make things happen. There are those that watch things happen. And there are those who are wondering what on earth just happened. And you want to be that first one. Now, there's research which has been done in disaster survival, and I think there's a lot of that comes across to this. What they found is they put people in simulated disaster situations, and how do they react? 10% of people believe there's a way that they are going to survive, and they keep going, trying to find the way to survive until either they find it and they survive, or the circumstances overwhelm them, but they never give up. About 80% of people distract themselves with other things. So there's a big air disaster in the UK where a plane caught fire on the runway. 10% of the people on there were climbing over everybody, over seats, works. They were going to get to the door and get out and survive. 80% of the people on that flight started to get their stuff down from the locker and pack their bags. Those are the people who don't survive. And then 10% were the other ones wondering what's happened. Those were the people in the air disaster who were sat frozen in their seats and doing nothing. So there is a group of people who are those people, who are the people that make things happen, as Jim Lovell would say it. And it was making things happen that got him and his crew home. And I think there's so much of that in disaster survival. The people that succeed are the ones that believe from the beginning they can succeed. Now, is it 10%? I actually think there's a lot of it depends on circumstances. One of the circumstances is complacency. If things are going well, people say, well, life's pretty good. I don't need all that extra. Let's do it tomorrow. Let's do it the day after, another time. We don't need to do it. Complacency, good circumstances are a bad time for innovation. The good times for innovation are when we are at the moment, when things are bad. That's because there is a need. You look at the countries around the world which have black markets, they are driven by needs. People are being innovative in the ways that they survive. And whereas in countries where things are going well, innovation is much less. And that's illustrated. If you look at Silicon Valley, the origins of Silicon Valley were not the people in Silicon Valley. They were refugees from Hungary when they tried to free up the political system in Hungary. Russia invaded with tanks on the streets. A number of people left and they went to the US and they landed up in California. They had nothing. They had no money, they had no jobs, they had no connections. They were desperate. They had to be innovative to survive. And they did. And they drove the first wave of Silicon Valley. And look at Steve Jobs, one of the best innovators in the world. What was his background? He was the child of Syrian parents who gave him up for adoption to working class parents who'd never been to university or their father had never been to high school. He came through all of that. He had nothing. He had a drive. He wanted to better himself, and that was driving him. If he'd been born into a wealthy family, would he have made the same success? I doubt it, because it would have been too easy to say, "Well, I got the money. I don't need it. I can live comfortably, enjoy my cars, my yacht, whatever I want." So I think there is this thing: necessity is the mother of invention, as they say, and it's a big driving agent, and that's why times like this are important. I spoke to a Silicon Valley biotech entrepreneur who set up sort of hundreds of companies of his life, and he said the most successful ones were set up in times of crisis. My second company was set up. I started it just as the Saddam Hussein walked into Kuwait and started the first Gulf War. Everything shut down. Why did I get it funded? Because some bankers at a now defunct bank called Bear Stearns had nothing to do. And they thought it was an interesting thing to fill their time because there was not a lot of banking going on. And so they worked with me. I knew them from my first company. They worked with me and they helped me raise the first round of finance. If it had been normal times, those bankers would have been extremely busy. They wouldn't have had time for me. So actually, crisis was, and the people's need in that crisis was actually instrumental in me being lucky. So many people see the positives in, lucky people see the positives in bad luck. Now I'd like to do an exercise which comes out of that book. So imagine you've gone into the bank, you want to get some money out, you've gone into the bank. While you're in there, there's a hold-up takes place. People come in with guns to rob the bank. There's a bit of a kerfuffle. One of the guns goes off accidentally. You get shot in the arm. Were you lucky? Hand up if you think that was lucky. Going into the bank at the time that the robbers came in and you being the one getting shot. Richard Wiseman set up a group of unlucky people who were unlucky thought they were unlucky, and people who thought they were lucky, and he put them into this scenario and said, "What did you think?" And the difference between the two groups was dramatic. The unlucky group thought they were really unlucky. They were the only person in the bank who got shot. Why was it them? How unlucky could you be? Hey, how unlucky could I be to actually have gone to the bank at the time this hold-up took place? Why couldn't I have been lucky and gone at another time? That was the attitude of the unlucky group. The attitude of the lucky group was, hey, I got shot in the arm. I'm lucky. I could have been killed. It's only a flesh wound. I'll recover from it. I was pretty lucky. And picking up on what someone said about the insurance claim, some of them said, hey, and I can probably even make some money out of it selling my story to the press. So dramatic difference. They saw the positives in bad luck. And I think we'll come on a little later to sort of thinking about what are some of the positives, and we might start thinking about that. So we'll come back to that a little later on, but sort of one of the things we would come back to is the pandemic, because everyone says, a lot of people think, how unlucky can we be? This pandemic, look what it's doing to my business. I've seen so many people who've built businesses up carefully over the years that have suddenly, through no fault of their own, the whole thing has been destroyed because of what's happened in the pandemic. But I think there are positives we can see in the pandemic, and I'll come back to those in our third session. But the good news is being lucky is a teachable skill. So what Richard Wiseman did was having got his 4 parameters, he then set up a course to teach these skills to people. And 80% of the people he taught these skills to said their luck had increased by an average of 40%. So the unlucky people, if they practiced his skills, became lucky. And the interesting thing is the lucky people who had never thought about this before, when they practiced the skills, thought about it, became even more lucky. And so I think for me, these are important things to think about when we're going through innovation and looking for that luck. There is so much in innovation, serendipity, luck in what succeeds and what doesn't succeed. But you can increase your luck by doing these things, keeping an open mind, expecting things to turn out well. I would recommend getting the book if you can and having it. It's a good read. It's very well written. But why am I telling you this? Because actually so much of this resonates with my experience in life. So much of what I have done in life has been lucky, chance encounters, meeting people, let's say, funding my second company purely because a Gulf War was on. I could have said, Gulf War, sort of the whole thing's a complete mess. Let's do it when the war's over. But I didn't. I went ahead and said, let's see if we can do this. And through talking to people, as a result of that, I found people who actually had time on their hands when they wouldn't normally, and had all the connections and skills to help me do it. And we successfully funded the company, and the rest is history. Too easy to have given up at that stage and not been lucky. And I would have been telling the story now about how unlucky I was about the company I started that failed thanks to the Gulf War, thanks to Saddam Hussein. So the last one I want to then cover is sort of, you asked about sort of your teams and how you make them more successful. And I want to come on to diversity of thinking is good. Has everyone come across De Bono's hats? De Bono's sort of his main fame is he started off as a doctor, but he's known for what's called lateral thinking, not thinking sort of straight along, but thinking sideways to the problem. And one of the things he noticed was a lot of organizations tend to have people in them who are very similar. Their thinking is very similar. We tend to recruit people who are like we are. And so what we end up with is a group of people who think the same way as we do. And in a crisis, when times are challenging, we can be lemmings. So they all run towards a cliff. And because we're all thinking the same, we all run off the cliff to our death, which is a famous thing that lemmings do. What you need is lemmings who think differently, who stand at the cliff edge and say, hey, lemmings, cliff, dead. Stop and think about it. And that's what De Bono came up with. So his exercise is for where you have a team of people who are thinking very similarly. And what he did was he said, and you can do this with individual members of the team, or you can do it as a group. He did 6 different colored hats. So he had a yellow hat, which is people who look for the positives about something. He had a black hat, the cautious people who look for the negatives. He had a white hat, the people who need the facts, the evidence, the data. There are blue hats, the people who actually will run the process, have to actually make it work. And then there are red and green hats for sort of feeling. Forget what the last one is. You can look it up. They're easily accessible on the internet. But so what his exercise was, and you can do this round the table, is everyone picks a hat they're going to wear. And that's their role, is to act like that person, not be themselves, but to act like the person that is wearing the hat. So if you pick the yellow hat, you are going to be positive, absolutely positive about everything about what you're trying to do and how it's going to work out and be good. If you've got the black hat on, you're going to say, hang on a minute, we've got a cliff here and it's fatal. Should we be running off the edge of it, lemmings? The guy with the white hat, the facts person, says, well, let's look at the evidence. The red hat says, well, my instinct says, my intuition, my gut feeling says that this is going to work or this isn't going to work. So all these different, so people around the table each take a different view of the problem that you're trying to solve. Now you can do that by giving everyone a different hat, or you can do it by taking the team and say, right team, right, we're going to put on our yellow hat and think about all the positives. Okay, now let's put on the white hat and look, what's the evidence we have to support that? And it gets that diversity of thinking going. And it's a good exercise if you've got a team which is sort of tends to get into group think, of all thinking the same thing. We need all that diversity of thinking. Now, a really perfect team, I'm very lucky in Cambridge Enterprise because I have naturally all the hats around the table. And it was quite interesting because when I first ran this exercise with them, because nobody around the table knew of De Bono and his hats. So we ran the exercise. And after one of them said, sort of, he got the yellow hat. He said, actually, I'm not a yellow hat. I'm a natural black hat. And I said, that's good. He was seeing it as negative. He was always the drag on the organization. I said, that's good. That's an important hat to have around the table. We need you to be looking at these things and looking at the things that could go wrong, exercising the caution, pulling back the enthusiast like me from sort of running ahead and falling flat on our face or running off the edge of a cliff. And there was a realization around the table that the strength of the team is actually that we have all those different hats and people play naturally to their strengths. Now, this is where I think diversity is a good thing. And and what I like about diversity around a table is different people, different cultures, different genders, different backgrounds and experiences, all bring different views to our thinking. And they're all important to honing a really good proposition that's robust and works. And one of the most interesting ones for me is some research that I came across about being innovative and entrepreneurs. There's one feature which is common in 35% of successful entrepreneurs. You can say Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Walt Disney, Henry Ford, Richard Branson. They all share one common trait. They are all dyslexic. 35% of entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, are dyslexic. About 2 to 5% of corporate managers are. So what does that mean? As a corporate manager, you have to deal with a lot of reports and documents. You need to have good verbal skills, good communication skills, good writing skills. Dyslexics struggle with that because they can't read and write. It's a real struggle for them. So they don't do well in a corporate environment, typically. What happens, most of them sort of run into problems at school because of the way the school system runs, but a small percentage of them actually work out how to make it work for them. They don't give up. They actually they think it's going to work out well, and they work out how to make it work. And how they do that? They tend to think in images, in pictures. They manipulate pictures, not text, in their minds. And they, as a result of that, I'm not dyslexic, but that's one of the things I can do. I like to understand something, and I create a mental model of it, and then I manipulate it to see how it would change if I change things on it. We can't all do that. Don't try and do it if that's not how you are. We need people who are the people who can do the reports and the reading and writing and all that stuff, but bring in people who have these other traits. Alan Turing, who is the father of computers, he was a very famous Cambridge academic and then wartime hero and computer initiated the whole computer revolution. He was almost certainly on the autistic spectrum. And I gave a talk about this to GCHQ, which is the National Security Agency of the UK. about sort of that. And I was really pleased. About a year later, I saw that GCHQ had actually started a program of recruiting specifically 100 what's called neurodiversives, people who have autism, dyslexia, all the things which make them sort of not what's called neurotypical. They recruited 100 into the organization because they came at problems differently. They could see solutions which the straight thinkers couldn't because of the different way their brains work. So it is, I think, a great good thing if you can do it, is bring as many diverse people into your organization to think about this. Don't just sort of do people that look like you. It goes back to the embracing new connections, new thinking that Tim Schmidt does, being lucky. So as organizations around building your teams, the more you can do that by bringing people in who are diverse in their thinking, the better. If you can't do that, because most of us have the teams we have and they change slowly over time as people leave and join, think about doing de Bono's hats, getting people into the de Bono hat exercise of thinking, let's take a problem. Let's think about how we're going to solve it. Put your hats on and tell us what you're thinking from different angles, and let's see how we do it. And free people up to actually allow the yellow hats to throw in outrageous ideas. I've often seen someone come in and throw in an outrageous idea in a situation where you're sort of, you got this, and someone says, yeah, but the facts are, the green hat is that that's not going to work. And then someone says, yeah, but if we took that and did this to it, and you see outrageous ideas evolving into positive ideas which are practical, which are innovations which you can use. And I think opening that up, making your team not afraid. And that's where I, as the leader, I like to throw in outrageous ideas, because if I can, people follow my lead, and they will come up, they will feel more comfortable. If the boss is doing that, then I can do it, than if the boss is watching me throwing a stupid idea in. There's a very famous physicist, Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner, one of the great physicists in quantum theory. And he tells the story of he started his first job and everyone got called out to a meeting and he was left in his office while they went to the meeting. And after half an hour, someone came and said, Richard, can you join the meeting? And he went in, the room was full of all these big figures. And the person who was chairing the meeting said, oh, thanks for joining us. We've got this problem, which is sketched up on the board. This system isn't working. Have you got any ideas for what will fix, what will solve it? And he said, I was there. I was a rabbit in the headlights. I didn't understand what was on the board. Everybody was looking at me. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, sort of. And he said, I sort of did the only thing I could think to do. I walked up to the board and I just looked at it and I didn't understand anything that was on there. So I just pointed at something and said, what does this do? And someone said, yeah, oh, that does. And then someone said, yeah, but, and from just pointing, that random pointing event, it actually triggered off a whole cascade process in other people's minds that led to actually solving the problem. And he got a lot of credit for that. He said, I didn't deserve any credit. All I did was randomly pointed at something I didn't understand on a board I didn't understand, and other people did the work. But actually, he was the trigger for people to actually start to thinking outside the tram lines of thinking. So diversity is good. Create it through de Bono's hats and other exercises, and where you can, do it by recruiting in people from different cultures, different genders, different countries, to be part of your team and actually celebrate. They think differently. I've worked with so many people who've been fantastic to work with, but people won't work with them because they work differently. They think differently. Whereas actually, I think that's a strength, not a challenge. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, Winnie the Pooh, one of the most famous children's book characters. This is where we are now. So this is just a sort of eclectic selection of things. And I think everyone's seeing the challenges of the pandemic at the moment, but I'd like to just take a few minutes with you. I said earlier, being lucky is actually looking for positives in bad situations. And I think there are a lot of positives around in the pandemic. What's happening out there is really tragic. It's really affected a lot of people's lives. A lot of people have lost their lives. There are some positives that we can bring out of this and build on. I mean, one, as I mentioned earlier, is that we're able to have this conversation. Before, it would have taken me probably 3 days out of my schedule to travel to Nigeria. We'd sit in a room together and we'd talk, and there's lots of benefits of doing it that way. But here we are, Alim in London, me in Barbados, you in Nigeria, and we're doing a day session, and it's working, I hope, perfectly adequately. I don't know about the content, that's for you to judge, but technically, we're able to have these interactions around the world. So be interesting just to see if some of you can come up with positives you've seen coming out of the pandemic. And that's not downplaying the massive downsides and tragedies which it's introduced, but there are also some things which are positive coming out of it. Well, let me give you some of the positives I've seen. This is one of them. I talked to someone who was a UK manager, senior manager in a major American biotech called Genentech. And she said every week they'd have a company meeting of the senior management, which would take place in California. And she would be on the end of a speakerphone. And everyone was having conversations in the room and nobody noticed her, and it was all being ignored. And she had several colleagues in other parts of the world who were in a similar position. They were more or less sort of listening in on the phone, but not part of the conversation. At a moment's notice, they had to switch to meetings like this using Zoom or Teams, which we're all doing nowadays. And thank goodness we had Zoom or Teams around. And they found the dynamics of the meeting changed completely. Suddenly, the people from around the world were able to participate on an equal footing with those in California. And remember what I said about diversity earlier? They brought in a lot of experience from different cultures and the business operating in different parts of the world. It changed the whole conversation and the quality of the conversation around the table. The net result, she told me, is Genentech has decided it's not going back to physical meetings for these things. It's going to continue them as virtual meetings because they are so much more effective. They get so much more engagement, so much more diversity of views that they want to preserve that and not send them back to sitting on the end of a phone, sort of unnoticed. So that's a positive for me. Some of the positives we've introduced, because now we've realized, I'm working from Barbados. Most people in the UK would not know I'm doing that. We've got people who've been working in India, in Italy, in Sweden, in Spain, in South America, from our team. And we suddenly realized Cambridge is an expensive place to live. And these days, a lot of people in employment, both adults in the family have a job, and there's a tension. If I move my job somewhere, what happens to the other person's job? So we've started to say, actually, in our recruitment, you don't need to come to Cambridge because this works perfectly well. We're running all our meetings online. You can participate online in them. You can come into the office occasionally, travel to the office to come and sort of meet personally, and all the things that you get from water cooler conversations and chance things that happen. But actually, you don't need to live in Cambridge to do that. And so and what we found out of that is sort of in our recruitment that actually we are getting a lot more applications from really good people who don't have to move home, but can actually join an organisation like Cambridge Enterprise much more easily. So there's all of these positives, I think, coming out of it that have been enabled by innovative technology and innovative thinking. And I'll come back into, if you move into that space, one of the things I come on to in this session is sort of one of the good guides that we've used on how to do that effectively. But taking your organization through this time is really down and sort of spotting what the positives are and motivating the organization behind you is down to leadership. And one of the important things about leadership, and because Alan likes 3-letter acronyms, TLAs, I'm going to use one, BTS. And BTS is Be the Swan. So I'm going to drop off because video sharing on this doesn't work, but I'm going to play you a 2-minute video from Harvard Business School, which I think encapsulates what being the swan is about perfectly.
So we all know that everybody knows everything about you, the good things, the bad things, what mood you're in. And this is a story when I was many years ago running a very large program of people. There were 400 people in the building, and the big boss came in for a visit. And when I say big boss, really was a big boss because I'm a little person and he was a very big man. And I was late for a meeting, so I was running along the corridor and he was at the other end, and he just held up his hand and he said, "Stop, what do you think you're doing?" And I was late for a meeting, so I was a bit flustered. And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm late for a meeting." He said, "No, what do you think you're doing?" So I said, "Well, I'm running." So he said, "And what do you think you're doing?" And all the time this big hand was in this big body. And I'm late. And eventually the penny dropped, and I realised that I was out of control, and I was showing people that I was late and I was out of control. And he said, and I'll always remember it, that everything you do is amplified. And so if you're out of control, things must be really, really bad. And the stress that's growing through this big group of people is just getting more and more. And so you need to calm down. And so after that, I walked to meetings. I made sure I had space to stop and talk to people and say hello and ask them how they were doing. And it was incredible how the culture just changed. So I tell everybody you need to be like a swan. So you need to think about this beautiful pool of water, the sun's reflecting on it, it's apricot pink colours, and the swan glides through. And yes, the feet are going underneath, but you need to be like the swan. And you get into big debates about whether that means you're being authentic and true to yourself. But in truth, you're just presenting yourself in the best possible way to get the best possible result. So that's my story about authentic leadership.
Okay, let me get this started again and let me talk. And I think I've often used the analogy of be the swan. I think it's a nice visual image. As a leader, if things are going bad, morale is low. If you're reflecting that, everyone sort of feels it and amplifies it, and things are being bad. As a leader, in difficult times, in innovative times, they've got to see you upbeat, believing that things will work out, seeing the positives in the bad things which are happening, all the things we talked about, being lucky. If they see that in you, a confident leader that they think knows what they're doing, knows what needs to happen to get them through this crisis, you will find it changes the whole culture of the organization. And going back to what I said earlier about John Harvey-Jones, having a clear vision of where you want to get to, that you share with them. This is where we're going to. Yes, we've got some tough times. This is what we're going to do to get through it, and I need you all behind me. Sort of something of an American sort of attitude, which is, okay, let's go out and let's whop them, and we're going to win this. And I think that from you as a leader is very important, that you are the swan. As soon as you show panic, I mean, imagine if you were a soldier on the battlefield and your commanding officer looked frightened and scared and not sure what he was going to do and can't tell you clearly what he wants you to do. We need to take that gun emplacement, and we may take some losses in doing it, but if we do that, the rest of the battalion will be saved. A lot of deaths, and we can actually move on and take the hill. That's what you want from a leader. You want someone who, under fire, under the worst conditions, is inspirational, has a positive outlook to things, that we are going to get through this. It's going to be tough, but we're going to get through it. And is the swan as you do that. Now, underneath the swan, there's feet going like this, going like crazy. but you don't see that on the Swan. You just see this beautiful gliding along the surface. And it's our job to keep that public face, which is that we are positive and we believe in things. And also you deal with, and this is something particularly I've come across with female leaders, is you deal with what a lot of us have. I've had it. It's called imposter syndrome. You don't believe you're up for the job. You believe you're going to let people down. You believe you're going to be found out by people who know better than you. You just got to put that aside, be the Swan, and take your team with you in this calm manner while you get things sorted. And think about how you behave reflects on everyone else, how they perceive you when you behave that way. Because you are the leader. People look to you for leadership, and they look for you for confidence that it's all going to work out fine. And if you don't have that leadership, this is Thuli Madonsela, who was one of the people that put together the South African Constitution, and she said, in the absence of crisis leadership, crisis management will spiral into a leadership crisis. And I think that's so true. You need the managers, as I said before, the people who will get things done, but you also need someone who is at the front there saying, this is what we need to do. If any of you are fans of Star Trek, you've got Jean-Luc Picard. They'll have a discussion with his team around the table. How do we deal with this latest crisis that's hit this episode of our program? And they come up with something. And what does he end up with as the leader? Make it so. That's an instruction to his team. We've decided what we're going to do. Now, all of you have got to make that happen. And if you have a purpose behind your organization, I think you can get over a lot of the low morale. If you don't have a purpose, if you don't have a calm leadership that knows what it's doing, you will spiral, and it will just go into a decline, which gets worse and worse. So this is why this is really important for you. And I can't tell you how to be a leader. There are many different leaders, from dictators to leaderless organizations. They all work well in their different ways. So work out what you want to be as a leader that can do this in your team and how you want to do it. And then make sure you do it. Now, I talked about remote working. That's something we had to embrace. The Cambridge Enterprise, basically, on a Monday morning, everything hit the fan. And just as we were doing a sort of a practice of working in a more COVID secure way in the office, we're just starting that exercise, and we had our Monday morning meeting on how to deal on incident action planning for how we deal with the incident of COVID hitting us. And we realized that we couldn't keep the office open. So at one day's notice, we had to switch to working from home. And we were making it up as we went along as best as we could, and everyone pitched in, and it kind of worked. But then someone pointed me to this, the GitLab remote playbook. It's one of the world's largest all-remote companies. They don't have any offices. Everyone works from home. They work from all around the world to do that. And I put the link at the bottom there because it's online. You can download it, and it's full of really good practical experience that they have discovered as to how you make these things work if you have to do online. And if, like Genentech, you decide you don't want to go back to doing it in person for the reasons they quoted. So I really would encourage you to do that. We talked about sort of also, where do you get your ideas from? And there's quite an old book now out of Princeton called Wikinomics. And it's how mass collaboration changes everything. So this is your company. You have a small number of people, they're sat around the table. Outside is the world. 7 billion people in the world. Do you think it more likely that the next idea for your company will come out of 10 people sat around a table, or 7 billion people in the world thinking about the same problem? And Wikinomics is all about how you harness the power of mass collaboration to your organization. And that's all about looking out for your ideas as well as inward. And there's a great story of a Canadian company called Gold Corp, based in Vancouver, who had gold mines across Canada and were losing money on them. Reserves were running out. And particularly one of them, Red Lake site, was really struggling. It wasn't bringing out much gold. So the CEO gave his geologist 10 million Canadian dollars to go and find some more gold on the land that they owned. And they went out and they came back and they said, well, we think we've got sort of find 10 places, but we don't know how much gold is there and we don't know exactly where it is. And he spent $10 million on this. So then he thought about it and he attended a talk about Wikinomics, and he came back and he did something which was an anathema to everyone in the organization, because your geological data is your crown jewels in a mining company, knowing where to mine and what to get. And he said, right, we're going to put all of this data up on the web, and we're going to run a competition with a $500,000 prize for anyone that comes up with a proven reserve of gold. And they put it out there. He took a lot of convincing internally, because everyone thought giving away the crown jewels, but he had realized it didn't matter because nobody else could dig on the land. He owned it. The company owned the land. No one else could come in and dig the gold up, only them. And they put it out there, and they had all sorts of people, more than 1,000 people sort of entered the competition. They had mathematicians, geologists, artists, computer modeling people, the works. And they came up, that competition came up with 10 new reserves, most of which his company geologists did not know about. And those turned out to be proven reserves and saved the company. And it's an illustration of how, going back to this diversity of views, it wasn't just geologists sat around the table talking about what they knew about. It was bringing in all these different skills of computing and mathematics and chemistry, which are not in his organization, and supplementing their own skills with new ideas and thinking that solve the company. And that has developed into what's called open innovation. A number of companies now have really opened up and sort of welcome it, whereas they used to shut down and say, we don't want you to tell us about anything because it's our proprietary knowledge, which is our special thing, and if you tell us things, it may compromise our ability to patent and protect what we're developing and all the rest. A lot of companies have opened up and now realize the benefit of open innovation is really high, because you do bring in all those different views and left field ideas and thinking about solutions. So again, it's a good read. I'd suggest if you get it, you skip through it, because he does makes a point and then takes a long time to labour the illustration of it. But you can see some of these things around that he's got on here, which have all been the result of mass collaboration rather than what goes on in a single company. So look outside your company, the innovation, and encourage your people to go and look outside the company. When I was in the company, we were developing a new medical device. What did I do? I sent my team out and said, go to the local electronics store, look at all the video players and amplifiers and tuners and all the consumer electronics that people have, washing machines, dishwashers, ovens, and look at the way they've used control. They put a lot of work into that, and they've worked out what people like using, what they don't. And they did that. They went out and came back, and instead of buttons and switches, we put knobs on for things. And people really, really liked that in our product, because that was what video players were doing. And we mimicked their knobs. And actually, to be honest, we went to the people that supplied the video player manufacturers, and we said, can you supply us with the controls which go behind the knob? And they did, and we built them in. So there's lots of ways going outside can actually open up your eyes to new ways of doing things. An important one, next one, is Wayne Gretzky, another hockey player, says, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. A lot of us as amateur sports people, our eye is on the ball. We're going to the ball, Wayne and top professional sports people don't do that. They see the ball and they look to where the ball is going to go. And that's where they start moving towards. And a lot of this is going back to the 10,000 hours. They did some study on baseball players. Because if you think about it, someone pitches the ball, it hits the bat, and then the ball starts to move. And by the time you stood around and watched the way the ball is moving and worked out where it's going to go, you're too late. If you start running at that point, you've missed it. And that's no good in a top sport. What they found is that over those 10,000 plus hours of practicing baseball, the top players have learned the sound, from the sound when the ball hits the bat, where it's going to go. And from the moment of the sound, before the ball's even started on its journey, they are running to the part of the field where it's going to be. And then when it follows its trajectory, they're there ready, waiting for it when it lands. They never look at where the ball's going. They just listen to the sound, go to where it's going to be, and then they look up to catch it. So going to where the puck is going to be, I think is important. That's what I said. Look at where your industry is going. What are electric vehicles going to do to the oil industry? What does that mean? How can you change based on your skill base and things you can do? How can you change to live in that new world? What's the internet already doing to media and banking, and where is that going? Where's it going next? How's AI going to play into that? How's autonomous systems going to play into it? How does the fact that sort of we're living our lives increasingly online and not going to physical banks going to play into that? How do you assess the decisions you need to make about whether to give money, loan money to people, whether to invest in people? All of those things, how's that going to change in the future? Because it will change and people will change it for you. And Nigeria cannot live as an island in a world which is changing in that way. So, and going back to being a leader, this is Dolly Parton, the famous American folk country singer and also philanthropist. Dolly Parton actually, as a philanthropist, gave $1 million to Vanderbilt University to support their work to get a vaccine tested and out. And so she has played a major role in, I know there are all sorts of issues about vaccine access around the world, which are sort of not encouraging, but I think Dolly Parton was able to play a big part in getting one of the major vaccines, which is currently out there and being used, available. And I think this is, again, going back to sort of being the swan and inspiring your team. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. That's your job as a leader. So if they're low morale, your job is to work out what is causing the low morale. How do I inspire them to get over that, to actually start to believe that there is a future, to actually want there to be a future, to actually do something for it to become our future? That's when you become a leader. And I'll go back for my penultimate slide to back to my mentor, Ollie Ricola. Because again, when I was struggling with a particular problem, he said this to me: focus on the downside. It's the downside that kills you. The upside is not generally. There are situations where sort of things grow too fast and they get out of control, where it can become a problem. But actually, things going well is not the problem. Make sure you've actually thought about where things can go wrong and how you're going to mitigate that happening. So it comes out in another phrase people use: hope for the best and plan for the worst. And as John Harvey-Jones, the person I spoke to earlier, again put it very beautifully. He said, the benefit of not planning is that failure comes as a complete surprise rather than following weeks and weeks of sleepless nights. So it is important not to get carried away, actually to make sure as you're going through this, the upside sorts itself out generally. The downside are the things where you need to be aware of as a leader, and make sure you are covering them off to the best of your ability to make sure that they are not the things that trip you up and kill you. And I've talked a lot about being positive, believing and all the rest, but it's actually being realistic about it at the same time. In difficult times, it's not easy. There are lots of bear traps and obstacles you can trip over along the way, and things that can blow you up. So while you're keeping everyone positive in the team, it's also your job to keep your eye out for the things which could go wrong, the sniper on the hill, the unexploded, the landmine in front of you, things like that, which are going to blow your plans apart, and make sure that you've thought about them, you have a strategy for dealing with them, and you make sure they're not a problem so you can continue on. So I know there's things that we need to do to finish off, Alan, but so I'll finish off sort of here by just saying thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today. I hope you get something out of it, and something that you can take back and say, don't take back and just copy it. Take back and think about how you use it in your organization, your culture, your personality to make things different. So, and then the Vulcan thing, greeting, which I learned to do as a Star Trek fan many years ago: live long and prosper, as Spock would say.